President Biden is back in Washington this morning following several days away where he visited the southern border and the North American Leaders Summit in Mexico City. The president's trip came to an end as it was revealed that classified documents from the Obama White House were found before last year's midterm election at a former office in Washington tied to Biden. Those documents are now under review by the DOJ. For the latest, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, who joins us from Mexico City. We're also joined by NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Vitali. Good morning to both of you. Mike, let's begin with you. Biden addressed those classified documents during a news conference at the summit yesterday. What's his response to what happened, and what more are we learning about those documents?
Well, Maya, there are still a lot of unanswered questions about this issue, both about the nature of these classified documents, whether there are additional documents potentially in other locations, and why they ended up at President Biden's office in downtown Washington, D.C. The White House issued a new statement yesterday, essentially using the fact that there's this ongoing Justice Department review as a shield, saying that they are going to be continuing to be limited in how much more they can say. But we did hear, as you say, from President Biden for the first time yesterday, and he stuck very closely to the script that the White House has been adhering to so far. Listen to what he had to say.
They immediately called the archives, turned them over to the archives, and I was briefed about this discovery and surprised to learn that there were any government records that were taken there to that office. But I don't know what's in the documents. My lawyers have not suggested I ask what documents they were. I've turned over the boxes. They've turned over the boxes to the archives, and we're cooperating fully with the review.
Now, the president said his lawyers did everything they should have as soon as they discovered these documents. But one question the president didn't answer that was put to him yesterday is why it took more than 2 months for the White House to confirm the existence of these documents. Remember, the statement initially put out by the White House said they discovered them on November 2nd. That was a few days before the midterm elections.
All right, Ali, over to you. Congressional Republicans who now control the House have quickly launched an investigation into those classified documents. What do we know so far about what information they're looking for?
Look, this was going to be investigation season for the Biden administration from Capitol Hill, no matter what, because once Republicans took the gavel, this was one of their central focuses, is investigation and oversight. Nevertheless, there are several Republicans on the Hill right now who feel that they really have something to sink their teeth into, especially as they were already preparing to look into what the Department of Justice did in regards to former President Donald Trump's taking of documents to his Mar-a-Lago home. Now they have a contrast point. These things are different in many ways, including but not limited to the fact that this is less than a dozen documents versus the hundreds that Donald Trump had. And of course, the ways in which they were turned over to the DOJ is an important distinction as well. Nevertheless, we've already seen congressional leaders calling for more information. And this is the real goal here might be to equivocate or to just muddy the waters between these two instances. I do think the important thing here to note, though, is it's not just Republicans who are seeking more information here. Yes, they are the ones likely to lead the investigations. But if you look over on the Senate side of this building, the top senator on the Intel Committee, Mark Warner, a Democrat, saying that he wants a briefing on the nature of these documents. It's the exact same thing that he called for after the Mar-a-Lago documents were made public. He never got that briefing, in part due to some scheduling issues, but he very much wants more information there as well. But again, people just trying to figure out what is in these documents, what happened, and what's the exposure here from an Intel perspective of what was left potentially out of the order in which it should have been kept in the first place.
Mike, let's talk about Biden's trip to Mexico. He took part in that summit with the president of Mexico and the Canadian Prime Minister. What were some of the big takeaways as the trip wrapped up, and what's the state of the U.S.'s relationship with both countries?
Well, Maya, it was interesting because we know migration issues have really been overshadowing this summit for the most part. But when we heard from all three leaders at that news conference last night, they all focused in their opening statements on economic issues, all three pledging to deepen the economic cooperation among their three countries, working through some of the thorny trade issues that have been a source of tension among the three, all with the idea of strengthening the supply chains within our respective countries and to reduce our dependence on foreign-made goods, especially especially from China, that was the source of a lot of those economic shocks over the last couple of years. Now, they also made a connection between economic cooperation, rebuilding the economies throughout the Americas, and that migration issue, saying that by improving the economies throughout the hemisphere, they reduce the need for individuals to flee their countries, to come and make that treacherous journey, for instance, to the southern border of the U.S. Now, it was also interesting to watch the personal dynamics between these leaders. President Biden, for instance, has known Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada for nearly a decade now, back to his time as vice president. They have a very warm relationship. There was sort of a hot and cold relationship on display between President Biden and AMLO, as they call the Mexican president here. On Monday night, the Mexican president criticizing the U.S. for abandoning their obligations in the hemisphere. But yesterday, the president praising President Biden and the U.S., and really for an issue that I'm not sure the president wanted his praise for. He noted that he didn't add even a meter of border wall, and that it was something the Mexican people were very grateful for, even if he knew it was a source of some political problems for President Biden back home.
And Ali, following Biden's trip to the southern border, we've learned that the GOP has filed articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, one Texas Republican filing those impeachment charges. This is a promise that they're making good on now that they're in the majority. And again, it stems from the kind of investigating that we're going to see them undertake the next few months, looking into the situation at the border. The expectation is that they will try to call Alejandro Mayorkas in, the DHS secretary, for testimony over the course of the next year. This is something the White House and these agencies have been preparing for, but nevertheless, this is what it looks like when there's divided government, a lot of oversight, a lot of investigation, and a lot of fingers pointing at the Biden administration.
All right, Mike and Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.